Not So Easy Films presents Part 4 of Michael's War, written and performed by Michael Brown, and dramatised in our Malvern studios.
There were occasions when we would go down to Singapore, to HMS Terror and the Singapore dockyard. On one embarrassing occasion, Cossack, the leader of the 8th Destroyer Squadron, was ahead of Comus, Concorde and Consort. I was working down in the after switchboard when a piece of the switch broke off and fell across the ring main system. This caused a short circuit and a tremendous explosion behind the switchboard. Cossack lost all power, including her steering. Cossack signalled to the other ships to stay clear, as we could have collided with them. Still every chance of running aground. Power was brought onto the ring main through the forward switchboard, and Cossack came right. Of course, I expected the whole might of the Navy to fall on me. But that's the thing about the Navy. If you are in a minor trouble, authorities jump on you smartly like a ton of bricks. But where there is big trouble, they all rally round to give support from the captain down. There was a court of inquiry directed by the Admiralty in London, but I was not inquired to attend. I was protected at every level. The inquiry found that that particular piece of equipment was unsafe and should not have been in service. I was completely exonerated. The only rap I got was from the Marshal at Arms. "Don't do it again, you stupid bastard." Once in Hong Kong, there was a call for volunteers to take part in a boxing match. The PT instructor said, "Come on, it's only a bit of fun, and they're all novices taking part." I thought, well, if they are all novices, why not give it a go? That swine of a PT instructor had then entered me in the Far East Open Championship. This included the whole of the Far East Fleet, the Far East Army contingent, which was huge, the RAF, the Colonial Police and many others. Now my first two bouts were very unfortunate. The first bout was against a very tall member of the Colonial Police. He was so tall, he could only hit me on top of the head, and I could only reach his ribs. Because I could hit him harder in the ribs than he could hit me on the top of the head, unfortunately, I won the contest. Misfortune piled on. In the draw for the next bout, I was given a bye. This put me into the semi-finals. The night of the big fight arrived. If only I could get some spots or break a leg. The Fleet Club in Hong Kong was packed to capacity. For my boxing gear, all I could find was an old white singlet and gym shoes, and I used the club's boxing glove. Now, the apparition that climbed into the ring opposite could not possibly have been weighed on the same scales as me. He was a big, beefy stoker, from the bandages under his gloves, professional boxing boots, shorts and vests. He glared at me across the ring with a stony look he must have perfected looking in a mirror. If it was designed to frighten an opponent, it sure was successful on me. No matter how much I tried to give him a nice smile from my corner, he was having none of it. Anybody who has been in a boxing ring will know that there is nowhere to run and nowhere to hide. I thought, well, as soon as the bell goes, I will take him by surprise and rush across the ring and land on as many punches as I can. Seconds out, round one. Gong, I rushed across the ring. The doctor, who was shining a light in my eyes, said, "You're okay. Just had a bit of a sleep for 45 minutes.
So this is the kingdom of heaven. So this is the sweet promised land. While angels tell of love, don't break the spell of love.
Soon after, Cossack was ordered to Singapore dockyard for a refit. And as the Korean War appeared to be at an end, many service personnel were sent back to the UK, including me. We took off in a battered old plane that no civilian airline would possess for a one-night stop at Karachi in Pakistan, then on to Nicosia in Cyprus. That was to be a one-night stop also. However, on board in the next morning, there was a call to say the Inoka terrorist group had planted a bomb on board, so we got to stay an extra night in beautiful Nicosia. At Pembroke, I immediately applied for another foreign draft. This was turned down. There were 3 notices on the board calling for volunteers. Aircraft carriers? Definitely out. Too much bullshit. The Royal Yacht Squadron? Interesting. Submarines? Very interesting. At that time, the Royal Yacht Britannia was in Chatham Dockyard to have the gold band painted around the ship renewed with more gold leaf. I requested an interview for the job and duly arrived on board. It was explained that I would be required to wear gym shoes all the time, not to speak on deck and stay out of the way of any members of the royal family. In other words, to keep completely hidden from view. No thanks.
You dream boats, you lovable dream
That
boats.
is how I came to spend the rest of my service in submarines. The basic training was intense and serious. It had to be. In submarines, everybody relies on everybody else to do the job they are trained for. The safety of the submarine depends on this. After training, I was posted to Acheron. This lasted only a few weeks before being sent to Tabard. The submarine Tabard was at the time one of our most modern submarines. Mainly it was quiet and reasonably fast. You have to remember that this was all before nuclear submarines. Having an HM submarine cap tally opened up a whole new world with the female population. Oh, it must be terrible. It must be horrible. It must be ghastly in a submarine. Then the pained look. I don't want to talk about it. I had perfected this far better than Alan Edwards with his war wound. And don't you hate it with that comforting arm around the shoulder bit?
Why do fools fall in love? Why do birds sing so gay?
A lot of the time I had aboard Tabard was up north. This was never spoken about openly, but all the other submariners knew where you were going when you said up north. It is now 2015. At the age of 80, I've just read a book by Michael Smith, who is an investigative journalist for the London Sunday Times and the New Statesman. He is an expert on espionage and how spies and special forces operate. He was Specialist Writer of the Year for 2006 and has many UK press awards. In his book The Spying Game, The Secret History of British Espionage, I came across a paragraph that I knew to be incorrect, so I wrote to Michael Smith as follows. Dear Michael, I know The Spying Game has been published for a few years now, and maybe it is a bit too late for comments. However, having only just read it, I feel I would like to add my view on the parts that concern me personally. This is about the statement in Chapter 18, page 305, and I quote, British submarine-based signals intelligence operations were briefly suspended after the Crab Affair in April 1956, but had resumed by the early 1960s when the Porpoise-class diesel submarines were regularly carrying out spying operations against Soviet ships exercising in the Barents Sea, unquote. In April 1956, during Khrushchev's state visit to the UK, I was based at Fort Blockhouse aboard the submarine Acheron on the opposite side of Portsmouth Harbour to the Soviet cruiser Ordzhonikidze, and remember the occasion well.
Into Portsmouth Harbour steams the Soviet cruiser Ordzhonikidze, bearing Prime Minister Nikolai Bulganin and Party Secretary Nikita Khrushchev. It's the first time Russia's leaders have visited Britain since the Soviet state was founded 39 years ago. Bulganin and Khrushchev stand with the cruiser's captain as the hawsers are pulled ashore and the big warship comes to rest.
In September 1956, I was transferred to HMS Tabard. Tabard was originally built as a T-class submarine, but in 1950 was converted to the official name of T Conversion Class, or, as submariners would have it, Super Ts. At the time, Tabard was one of our most modern boats, being one of the first to have a conning tower replaced by a fin. More importantly, she was the quietest. My main point is, from September 1956 to the middle of 1957, I went on 3 of these trips up north, carrying out spying operations in the Barents Sea, our main target being Kola Bay and Murmansk. It would appear the advice you had regarding no covert operations between Commander Crab going missing and the early 1960s was not correct. My other point is this. It is true, as you say, that before leaving Portsmouth, all hatches, excluding the control room hatch, were sealed from the outside by welding steel bars across the hatch cover and, as you said in the book, effectively entombing all 70 men inside. The official line for this was to stop the Soviet depth charges popping the hatches and sinking the boat. Not one of us aboard believed this. If this was the case, World War II submarines would have been sealed in a similar manner. All on board believed it was to save the government embarrassment should we have needed to escape. There was even a buzz on board that the captain and some other officers had been issued with sidearms to prevent any escape through the conning tower. My question to you, Michael, if you have time to answer it, is the official line correct, or would they have sacrificed 70 men to save embarrassment? Or because at the time every man and his dog had his finger on a nuclear button, would there have been more disastrous consequences having 70 British submariners pop up in the middle of Kola Bay? A little about the actual operation. After passing the Isle of Wight, we would submerge and stay that way for 6 weeks until our return. There were no torpedoes on board. The forward torpedo storage space and the torpedo tubes were loaded with extra food and containers of water. The fresh water tank was not large enough to hold drinking water for the entire trip, and drinking the water was all that was allowed. So nobody washed for 6 weeks, and with this we had hot bunk. In theory, 3 men to 2 bunks. I say in theory because we had an additional 6 bodies on board going by the name of coders. Coders were university and HMS Mercury trained in the Russian language. Because of their presence on board, I was very often had to sleep on the metal deck diving station in a motor room. Most nights we would come up to snorkel depth to give us a bit of extra speed, charge the batteries and get some air through the boat. In the target area, my job was to operate the sound equipment set up as a listening device in the 4 ends. This consisted of a contraption much like a cinema projector, but almost twice the size. It is amusing to think nowadays it could be done with a handheld computer. I was told it was to feed information into acoustic torpedoes. I don't think the word programming had been invented in those days. Apart from my listening device and coders tracking radio communications, we also had a special camera fitted to the attack periscope. Kola Bay gave us a most unpleasant experience as we tried to photograph Soviet naval installations whilst dodging anti-submarine warship. The depth charges were not designed to blow us out of the water. However, the thought was always there, what if they changed their policy and the next depth charge is the big one, The first trip up north was not so bad, but during the second and third trips, the Soviets were a lot more aggressive. They realised that by having two ships working together, one stationary, guiding the other to our position, we had to endure that express train roar above us with more depth charges and a lot more accurate. After the second trip, a number of the married men with families decided not to chance their luck on a third. The journey home was more of the same, except by then everything in the boat was green with mildew and soaking wet. On finally surfacing and opening the hatches at Fort Blockhouse, I think everyone, at least in Gosport, wondered where the stench was coming from.
Well, bless my soul, what's wrong with me? I'm itching like a man on a fuzzy tree. My friends say I'm acting wild as a bug. I'm in love.
Just so I can verify the dates, at the end of 1957, I was transferred to HMS Trespasser. She was one of the oldest submarines and the only one left with a 4-inch gun on the casing. Then in 1959, I was back at HMS Dolphin prior to discharge and was in the colour guard when Her Majesty presented the Queen's colours to the submarine service for the first time.
The next royal engagement was across the water at Gosport, where the Queen visited the submarine command at HMS Dolphin. Among those who awaited the Queen on the playing fields of the Royal Naval Hospital Haslar were the submarine old comrades. With some of them, good mornings begin with a hard broom. Main object of the royal visit was a presentation of the Queen's colour to HMS Dolphin for the submarine command. A silk white ensign with crown and royal cipher, the Queen's colour is held by each of the Royal Naval Barracks at home ports. Proud of their new colour, the parade marched past. In every way, a great day for Portsmouth and the submarine command.
Got no bags and baggage to slow me down. I'm traveling so fast, my feet ain't touching the ground.
In 1960, I was on my way to New Zealand, where I have been ever since. Never did see those porpoise-class submarines you were talking about. Thoroughly enjoyed reading The Spying Game and would very much like to hear from you, Michael Brown. Michael Smith replied, "Thank you for your email. I intend to get the rights to this book back, so we'll be updating it at some stage in the relatively near future and will incorporate what you say. Presumably your trips up north were SIGINT related, and that meant signal intelligence. Signed, Michael Smith. I will be interested in how much of what I have said will be incorporated in the updated version of The Spying Game."
Shark, babe, has such teeth, dear, and it shows them pearly white.
After Tabard, I was transferred to Trespasser. At first glance, I could see there was no way Trespasser could have gone up to Murmansk and survived. She was a lovely little boat with a crew of only 39. She was built during the war in 1942 and was the last British submarine with a 4-inch gun on the casing. Because she looked so much like a German U-boat, we played the part of in the film called The Key with Sophie Loren, William Holden and Trevor Howard.
I don't want it. Take it. No. When Van Barger gave me a key, he made me promise to have another one made just as soon as I ever used it, and to give it to someone on the tugs. But I didn't know who to give it to. I want you to have it.
The crew were all warned by the captain not to give Trevor Howard any of the ship's rum. His reputation preceded him. On the first day, the Stars visited the boat. Sophie Loren, William Holden went straight to the wardroom with the officers. Trevor Howard, on the other hand, came into the fore ends and said, "Where's the rum, fellas?" When he left the boat, I had his left leg, somebody else had the other, and another was pulling on his arms. It's not easy dragging someone up through a torpedo loading hatch, which is set at an angle to allow a torpedo to slide into the submarine, especially a drunken actor. The captain was not very happy.
What will we do with the drunken sailor? What will we do with the drunken sailor? What will we do with the drunken sailor early in the morning? Way, hey, up she rises, way hey, and up she rises, way hey, and up she rises early in the morning.
In June 1959, Trespasser was alongside HMS Dolphin. With other submarines, we were ordered to form a Royal Guard of Honour for Her Majesty the Queen, who was to present the colours to the submarine service. Up until now, the colours were for the Royal Navy. Now the service had its own identity and own Queen's colours. No measles this time, but of course no millions of viewers for the Jack Me Hearty bit. The commander of the Guard was Lieutenant Commander Cameron, VC, who was awarded the Victoria Cross for a midget submarine attack on the German battleship Tirpitz.
Sailor, stop your roaming.
It just shows what sunspots can do to radio communications. On patrol one day, we signalled our intention to submerge and to surface at 1700. At 1700, we surfaced and sent the required signal. About 2 hours later, we received part of a signal made hazy, obviously by sunspots, to the effect that submiss was in operation. An hour later, we had another blurred signal, subsunk was in operation. We did get the coordinates, but not the name of the submarine that was missing. These coordinates were in the same area as us. We started searching. Subsunk meant the whole of the home fleet would put to sea. All Army and Air Force personnel would be on standby. All search and rescue units would put to sea. Surprise, surprise. We were looking for ourselves. The 1700 signal did not get through to the submarine base in Portsmouth. It did get through to the Admiralty. They sent an acknowledgement, assuming Portsmouth had received the same signal. When we finally went ashore that evening, the headline in the Portsmouth newspaper was "Submarine gone down with all hands." I rushed to a phone and phoned my parents to let them know I was okay and not to worry. However, the London newspapers had not yet got the story, and by the time they had, we had found ourselves anyway. It was then my mother started worrying, even though I was okay.
Now there are 3 steps to heaven. Just listen and you will.
From time to time, we would take a trip up to Scotland. On one occasion, we had to berth alongside HMS Woolwich, a submarine depot ship, or mothership as they were called. Now, if you went ashore, you had to board Woolwich on the starboard side before boarding Trespasser secured alongside on the port side. This particular night, or was it morning, I arrived on board Woolwich with a road lamp I had picked up at some roadworks. Unfortunately, the Marshal-at-Arms was on duty on the quarterdeck. When I arrived at the gangway, he said, "Stop where you are. What are you doing with that lamp?" I replied, "Good evening, master. I'm looking for my elbow." Even in my drunken state, this sounded a little silly. He then had to ask a silly question. "Where is your elbow?" "Up a lamppost," I said. "Up a lamppost. Put him in the cells." So I spent a night in the cells. Most unfair, because he was up a lamppost. That's where I had tied his shoes. Up a lamppost.
Walking through a party in the county jail. The prison band was there and they began to wail. The band was jumping and the drum began to swing. You should have heard the knocked out jailbird sing that rock.
My sister Pat, her husband Reg and their son Christopher had immigrated to New Zealand. My parents decided to follow. This set me thinking, would I like the challenge of a new country? The answer was yes. I decided to try discharge by purchase. I wrote out my request for discharge by purchase and had it ready to hand in to the captain for his approval. That day, we went out on patrol, we submerged, all was well, the boat was steady and on a good trim. Suddenly, we must have hit a patch of fresh water. The stern dipped and we started a stern dive. Now, this can be very bad news, even fatal, as the crew loses all control of the submarine in a stern dive. We were sinking by the stern, and as we got to the maximum diving depth with the pressure hull moaning and groaning, Trespasser slowly came to a stop. With all ballast and fresh water tanks blowing, we slowly, very slowly, came to right ourselves. When everybody had calmed down with the extra tot of rum the captain had ordered, I decided to hand in my discharge request. There was a huge roar of laughter. They thought it one hell of a joke. After what we had been through in the last hour, it took some convincing on my part to make them see for real.
It's now or never. Come hold me tight. Kiss me, my darling. Be mine.
When the time came for discharge, I discovered, yes, I would be discharged, but I would be on reserve for 5 years. This meant I would not leave the country. I don't think they had had a case like this before, with someone having discharged by purchase and wanting to leave the country soon after. To get around this, I was offered a job on the government cable laying ship Monarch. Although GPO, it was under the jurisdiction of the Royal Navy and was a reserved occupation. Therefore, by signing on, I would be exempt from the 5 years reserve. In 1959, I left Trespasser and joined Monarch for a trip to San Juan, Puerto Rico in the West Indies, to lay an underwater telephone cable from there up to Fort Lauderdale Beach in Florida, USA. We then had a call to say a fisherman had hauled in with his nets the transatlantic telephone cable. To get rid of it, he had chopped it in half and thrown both halves back into the sea. So, from Miami, we went all the way up to Nova Scotia to the Grand Banks fishing grounds, and there it was 35 degrees below freezing. We found by sewing up both ends of the cable, we got them both on board and repaired them. Then we threw them back into the sea. Back in England, I collected my gear from HMS Dolphin, the submarine base, and then went over to HMS Victory in uniform for discharge. No reserve. I marched aboard the flagship and saluted the quarterdeck where Nelson fell. It would be nice to think that this tradition still carries on. From the recruiting office at Blackheath in 1952 to the quarterdeck of Nelson's flagship in 1960, I marched off, handed in my cap and paybook, and so ended 8 years with the Royal Navy. I wouldn't have missed it for the world. The very next day, I bought a packet of 30 envelopes. I wrote a letter seeking a one-way berth to New Zealand, copied this out 30 times by hand, and sent them off to shipping companies and agents I found in the shipping magazine. I had one favourable reply, but that was all I needed. They informed me that a ship was being built and was almost near completion at Grangemouth in Scotland. The ship, Moana Roa, was to be delivered to the New Zealand government for trading between New Zealand and the Cook Islands. Within days of reaching Scotland, I was on board and we were underway. From Scotland, London, Panama, Tahiti, Rarotonga, Wellington. In those days, it was a big occasion for the New Zealand government to buy a ship, even if it was such a little ship. On the quayside when we arrived were the Prime Minister and all his cabinet. I can honestly say that the first person I shook hands with when I arrived in New Zealand was the Prime Minister, Walter Nash. Arriving at Browns Bay in October 1960, I found it hard to settle.
The cities and towns of the nation are modern in every respect and unique in their administration, for the government has a hand in everything from milk plants to railroads. They work a strict 5-day week, and on Sunday you can't purchase a newspaper or a razor blade.
Browns Bay at that time had no more than half a dozen shops and a garage. There was no great excitement, as I had been used to. If I could have found the money for my return fare, I would have caught the next ship back to England and signed on in the Navy for the 22 years. At first, I tried many jobs, but nothing too interested. Then I saw an advertisement for prison officers at the maximum security prison, Mount Eden. Thinking it sounded an interesting job, and possibly with a chance to help people, yeah, right, I applied.
Michael rowed the boat ashore, hallelujah. Michael rowed the boat ashore, hallelujah. Michael's boat is a gospel.
It was required for officers, screws that is, to sign up for and serve a minimum of 3 months. That was the longest 3 months of my life. In the 3 months I was there, I was mostly on night shift. They gave me a revolver and 5 rounds of ammunition to patrol inside the prison. No training whatsoever, not even to show me where the safety catch was. You can imagine all the noises, the creaks and groans of the old prison, and the groans and other noises of the inmates behind their cell doors. Thinking if someone got out, who would they first use the gun on? 4 hours of this, then 4 hours outside on the guard post on top of the perimeter walls, this time with a rifle, again no training. If anyone had gone over the wall when I was manning the guard post, I would definitely not have seen them. If a guard shot an escaping inmate, neither his nor his family would ever be safe. They would have had to leave the country. On a Sunday afternoon, I was in the exercise yard with several hundred inmates. The senior officer of the day came strolling over to me with a big smile on his face and said through gritted teeth, "Make your way slowly to the nearest gate." Still smiling, he added, "We've been told to expect a riot this afternoon and possibly a breakout." Now, why did I have to be at the furthest point in the yard away from any gate? The inmates, who don't miss a thing, could see all the screws leaving the yard, albeit slowly, and I would be the last to get out, if at all. Calmly, as I possibly could, I made my way across the yard, through looks of sullen hatred and spitting on the ground in front of me. Heart pounding, sweating and shaking, I finally made it through the gate. I very quickly turned and locked it. My God. A year after I left the prison service, 4 inmates broke out during the night. One of them was going to shoot the screw with his own gun. It was the intervention of the other 3 that stopped him. What if he had been on his own? Also, nobody saw him go over the wall. Very wise.
My little runaway, run, 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 run away.
The Mount Eden prison riots started at 2 a.m. on the 20th of July by 2 prisoners making a break for it, and they had clubbed an unlucky screw who had discovered them, and they took 2 hostages and set about unlocking cells. Chaos ensued as the newly liberated inmates lit fires and fueled them with oil, furniture and their own personal effects.
The jail at Mount Eden in Auckland, New Zealand, where more than 200 rioting convicts were besieged by warders and police. It began with an attempted breakout by 2 prisoners, one armed with a rifle. Overpowering their warders, they released other inmates using an improvised key and an iron bar. Then began a rampage of destruction. New Zealand's top security jail became a battleground in a haze of smoke from burning buildings set alight by the rioters. Firemen trying to control the blaze were met with a barrage of cutlery, bottles, bricks and furniture. Mount Eden held most of New Zealand's toughest prisoners, all serving long terms for crimes of violence. Eventually, after the men had been brought under control, some of the rioters were removed to another penitentiary in Christchurch.
Firemen had to retreat under a barrage of bricks and other missiles. Armed police, warders and troops stood guard around the prison and used warning shots and high-powered hoses to discourage breakouts. Eventually, the food ran out and they had lack of fuel and shelter took its toll, and the prisoners surrendered 33 hours after the riot had begun.
Return to sender. Address unknown. No such number.
Now, unclaimed to a bit of macabre history, lining up with the other screws to be assigned duty for the day, I was asked to go and see the chippy. It was a carpenter. He took me down to the pound. This is where all the more violent inmates had their cells. At Palermo Prison, the new maximum security prison, this is now called D Block. The chippy opened the door and I was dumbstruck. It was the execution chamber. And he said, "Come on, we have to dismantle this lot today." The two of us worked all day dismantling the gallows. We stacked it in the cell next door, which was the condemned cell, where the prisoners waited in there to be hanged. Now that place could tell a few stories. Between 1842 and 1957, there were 83 people hanged on these very gallows I was dismantling. It was 1961 and a death penalty was now abolished. So get rid of the gallows. After the prison, the next job I went to was as a bus driver with North Shore Transport. I stayed with this company in one capacity or another for a number of years. About this time, with nothing else much to do in my spare time, I joined the Torbay Drama Club and met Anne Thomas.
The year is now 2017, and Anne and Michael have just celebrated their 52nd wedding anniversary, and they are living happily ever after. That was the final episode of Michael's World, written and performed by Michael Brown, and it was a not-so-easy production, produced and edited by Tarquin Young in our Malvern studios.